Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of Sports Talk New York, the Facebook edition live. Today's show is centered around one of the most talked about trades in Met history, as on June 15th, 1977, the Mets sent future Hall of Famer and franchise icon Tom Seaver to the Cincinnati Reds for four players, Dan Norman, and two of our guests, and maybe a third. Pat Zachry is having a little technological issues trying to get on, but joining us now is Doug Flynn, who was a two-time world champion with the Reds, as well as Gold Glover with the New York Mets, played over 1,300 Major League games over an 11-year Major League career. Joining him is Steve Henderson, who was drafted by the Cincinnati Reds in the fifth round of the 1974 Major League Draft out of Prairie View A&M University. He'd go on to have a 12-year Major League career. Welcome, guys. How you guys all doing?
Doing fine.
We're doing good, Mark. Thank you. Hindu, good to see you, buddy.
You too, baby. Good to see you too, Dougie. I'm glad you're doing all right, brother.
I know Stevie and I were dear friends, man. We sat on a couple of buses together before we got hooked up in New York, didn't we, Stevie?
Yeah, but I got a chance to learn a lot from you guys.
So how hunkered down are you guys now?
Huh?
How hunkered down are you now?
Well, I'm pretty locked down right now. I got a little bit of a little golf every once in a while with a fellow by the name of Dick Bosman, pitcher. Old gentleman, but we're doing all right.
Yeah, we went back to work today. They opened up quite a bit here in Kentucky, so I went into the bank and worked some this morning, and everybody's going around with a mask on, but you know we're getting antsy around here, just as everybody else is. But they've turned us loose for a little bit.
You know, every now we've got to stick pins in the doll of your senator now.
stick pins in our senator?
Yes.
Here in New York, yeah.
Yeah, well, let's not get too much into politics because I got a feeling
really,
you and
AJ.
I might be on the opposite ends of that.
Great job, AJ. Way to derail the interview before it even starts there, AJ. So, you know, what's unimaginable that it's been 43 years since that trade. You know, before we get to the trade, let's talk about your careers with the Reds and the Reds organization. So, Doug, you're a standout multi-sport athlete in high school, playing baseball, basketball, and football. You played quarterback on a 12-1 team. You went to the University of Kentucky on a combination baseball, basketball scholarship. So, wait a minute. So just so people can see this, and this will give everyone their daily smile. Here's Dougie, good old number 10, all the way. I guess, what did they pose that in size order, Doug?
Yeah, and a lot of different orders, probably talent too. I was down at the far end. But it was kind of weird back in those days. It was 1969. Kentucky really had been lily white up to that point, and so I had a chance to room and play with the first African American that ever played basketball at Kentucky, baseball and basketball. Roomed with Darrell Bishop, who came over on the baseball team, and then Derek Bryant, who later went on and played some with Oakland, was on the baseball team. Dear friends to this day. So it was kind of a unique time. Coach Rupp was still around. I didn't know what I wanted to do. It seemed like a pretty good thing. Go play ball at Kentucky? Yeah, why not?
So the interesting thing is that's before, you know, freshmen were allowed to play. So I assume that you did you guys practice with the varsity, and did you interact with Coach Rupp and a guy on that team that was a pretty good basketball player in the name of Dan Issel?
We scrimmaged against them every day. So we'd go in and scrimmage an hour against the varsity, and we'd have our own scrimmage. Issel still remains a good friend. Boy, they had a good team. They were ranked number 1 in the nation that year. They ended up getting beat by Jacksonville in the playoffs. But yeah, every day, it was probably the best growing up year that I ever had because it taught you how to compete when you're playing with guys that were that good.
So while you're at Kentucky, you and some friends go to a Cincinnati Reds tryout camp. Can you tell us a little bit about that tryout and how that developed?
Well, it was actually it was the following year at a junior college, and I went and tried out just on a lark. Some guys kind of had a dare, says, we're going to try out for the Reds. Why don't you go first? And I went, all right. So the scout looked at me and he said, you're not real serious about this, are you? And I went, well, not really. And so I went to 2 more tryout camps, and then they finally came back to Lexington. I had another tryout camp, and they signed me for $2,500. That was 1971. and I went to my first spring training camp in 72 after going 2.5 years of college.
Wow. So the guy who I believe discovered you was Gordon Coleman, and I think in that same tryout period he also
guy named Chet Montgomery. Chet Montgomery.
Okay, but
did you know him, Stevie?
Huh?
Did you know Chet Montgomery at all?
Yes, I did. Good man.
He was. He was the scout that signed me, and later on was with. I think he went to the Pirates after us, but they don't do. I don't know if they do as many tryout camps because they got all these specialty things that they do now. But you know, back then you just had a bunch of guys that went out, and at a tryout camp you get a round of infield, 5 swings, you run the 60-yard dash, and then they start making notes on you.
So, Steve, you are an infielder in the beginning of your career, right? And you're
that was short, very short though.
You were shortstop though, right?
Thanks to Mr. Doug Flynn and them up in the big leagues, and Mr. Jimmy Hoff, God bless his soul. But we were the brothers that you can run a little bit. You had to go to the outfield.
So it's interesting. On the way up, both of you have one of the managers early on. Russ Nixon was your manager, Doug, and he was also one of your managers, Steve. What was your experience going through the Reds minor league organization, knowing what they had built already up at the major league level, and your first impressions, and what did Russ Nixon teach both of you? Stevie, you go first.
Well, first of all, you know, when I came to the Reds, I didn't even know any history about it. But I knew they had some good ball players in the organization. And once we got there, me and Donnie Lyle and them, we got there and we saw all the talent. And we was thinking how long it was going to get there. So, but I thought that the organization was very fundamental and sound. And all the years that I've been doing this coaching, I still think Cincinnati was one of the best fundamental sound systems in the game.
Dougie, for you, what was it like in the minors and learning the Reds way? We hear the Cardinals way, but what was it like in the Reds?
Well, everything pointed to the big leagues, but we had such great instructions. We had Jimmy Hoff and Ron Plaza. Well, Jimmy was a player back in my day, though, before Stevie was there. The first couple of years I played with him, then he went to the organization. Vern Rapp, Jim Snyder. You know, Russ Nixon told me after my first year there, I was ready to leave because they had a lot of number 1 draft choices there. I was out of a tryout camp. I really didn't think I was going to get a chance to play an awful lot. I had a chance to go back to a small school and play basketball. And Russ Nixon said, I think you need to stick it out another year or two. And because of that encouragement, I stayed around and pretty thankful that I did.
So you make your major league debut in 1975. What's it like to be a Red at a time when the roster includes Johnny Bench, Tony Perez, Joe Morgan, Dave Concepcion, Pete Rose, Ken Griffey, and George Foster?
Well, they didn't take long to get me into the game. I played every single game in spring training. And because, you know, when you went there, the big boys would play a little bit and get to go in. Well, they put me in the lineup and I started hitting in spring training in 75. Had a great spring. So I think they kept playing me, hoping I'd play really bad and they could get rid of me. But I just kept playing pretty good. And then first game of the year against the Dodgers, I could get in and have a bunt. My first at bat in the big leagues, I got a bunt. Probably the most important at bat in the big leagues that I had, because I know if I don't get it down, Sparky's sending me back to AAA ball. And but they treated us so good. I think Stevie will tell you the same thing. All the big guys, and I mean, in those days, you know, Griffey and Dreesen were still trying to make it to the big leagues. And then you had a bunch of us that were coming up at the same time, me and Zach, McEnany, Raleigh Eastwick. Stevie was a little bit behind us. And
Youngblood was there.
Yeah, Youngblood, that's right. So we had a good bunch that had been in the minor leagues together for a while, but there really wasn't any place for us to go in the big leagues. And you look around, where are we going to play? There just wasn't a lot of openings.
That's interesting you say that, because Stevie, I know the spring training of 77. First spring training game you go 0-4. The second game you hit a 400-foot bomb. Later in the week you hit 2 home runs. At that point, people started asking about you, and they asked Sparky after that particular game, and Sparky said, he could have hit 8 home runs in this game. He's still going to Indianapolis. And when they asked you about it, you said that you could use, you'd rather go down to Indianapolis where you could play, every day. That being said, how much did you learn in that spring training with those same group of guys that I just mentioned to Doug? And was there any one of those veterans in particular that took you under their wings during that spring training in 77?
Well, like Dougie said, we had big players. When I got there, all of them treated me real well. But I can remember Don Dreesen, and also I can remember Griffey. Griffey really talked to me a lot, and Tony Perez, them guys, and even Doug and them. Doug and them was coming, trying to get there too, but they were so professional the way they done it, man. And we was just, man, I was like a happy kid. And matter of fact, go back real quick, that folks back out Pete fought. First spring training, because Pete, all of a sudden he got sick, so I had to play. So I blame that on him. I thank Griff and him, and I meant to mention Mr. Ron Plaza. I meant to go back and mention him because Plaza had a lot to do with me. A lot to do with me. So.
Yeah, buddy. Yeah, buddy.
So this is what Sparky Anderson had to say about you after you got traded to the Mets. He was talking to Dick Young of the Daily News. He said, quote, "You're going to love this kid. I don't mean just his ball playing. He's going to be an outstanding ball player, but you'll love him because he loves to play ball. He's always smiling. Like Ken Griffey. He's gifted to play baseball because he loves to play. He's the kind of kid, when I talk to him about playing, sweat would break out on his forehead. That's how badly he wants to play. He talks about your skills. He said he'll get picked off, but he must be allowed to make mistakes. If there's one thing he can't do, it's throw. His arm is ordinary." So
yeah, he was right about that. But I know one thing, all the runs that I let in, I was going to drive in more to make up for them.
There you go. There you go.
Oh,
hey,
wow.
AJ, you and I were talking earlier, Sparky really didn't talk to us a whole lot.
At all.
Because we hadn't made the grade yet. He talked to the other guys. Every time we got a message, it would come through another player from Sparky.
Well, I remember in particular, you told me a story at one of the fantasy camps, Doug, about the trainer's room. I think you went into the trainer's room once, and was it Morgan or one of the guys told you, don't ever go in there?
Morgan.
Which was the guy that told? It was Morgan.
Morgan was getting a rub down. I walked in there, and he turned around, and he said, "What are you doing in here?" And I went, he said, "That's right. You ain't supposed to be in here." And I turned around and get out. And I turned around and went out.
That was the rule.
That was the rule. That's right. And they used to tell you what, you can't win the pennant in the training room.
That's right.
So we never went in there. I didn't even know we had a trainer until the 25th reunion.
Oh, man. Wow. So, it's interesting because Doug, you're around for 2 world championships. So I have to imagine as a young player, you very early in your career, winning 2 world championships, where other guys have played their entire careers, some 20, 30, 25 years and never make it. What was that experience like for you at such a young age to be part of a world championship?
Well, Mark, you talk about timing in this game and, how blessed I was to get in the game and then to make the team at that point in time. They were so good. There was so much pressure on them in 75 because they lost in 70 to Baltimore. They lost in 72 to Oakland. They got beat by the Mets 73. So they were ready to explode. And then George Foster hadn't even gotten the lineup in. And when they made the move of putting Pete at third base and Foster in the lineup, they just really took off. So, I was really fortunate to be on that ball club. But, the game was learned, even though we had great teachers of the game and they took time with us. I learned mostly from Darryl Taylor, Bill Plummer, Bob Bailey, Terry Crowley, Merv Retton. Those were the guys that were on the bench that knew they weren't going to be an everyday player. So they would come to us and say, "Look, when you get a chance to play, this is what you're going to have to do, and you're going to have to be ready." So there was always coaching going on during a ball game.
right, so that being said, you're part of those 2 world championships. Steve, you're one of their top prospects, along with Dan Norman in the minors. Going into 77, I would have to imagine the furthest thing from your mind is a trade. Did you ever, in spring training, did you see that come along?
No, all I thought about it was just trying to play and do the best I could. And hopefully I got to the big leagues. We was taught a long time ago, if you go out there and do your best, somebody will see you.
That's right.
Tell about it, like I say, Mr. Ron Platts, he told me, I'm not getting you ready for the Cincinnati Reds. I'm teaching you to play in the major leagues. And even with me starting to coach, I use that same philosophy with the kids.
Boy, you're right, Stevie. I remember Plaza saying, guys, every time you go out on the field and play, there's going to be somebody there. Even if they didn't come to see you, you play so that they will look at you.
Exactly.
So let's follow up what Mark said, though. So this was a trade deadline deal, and the trade deadline was in June at the time. And leading up to it, and there's a lot of activities going on, all sorts of teams, or a lot of deadline trades. As somebody who's on the major league roster, Doug, but has trouble breaking into the starting lineup, so who's ahead of you? Or Steve, as somebody who's on the AAA club, again, hard to break the lineup because who's ahead of you. How aware are you of the trade deadline at that point? You're following it, you're looking at, are you reading the papers and saying, the talk, the scuttlebutt, who might be traded, or just, keep your head down and play your game?
Well, no, I know for me, they
go on, Doug. I'm sorry.
No, Stevie, they had an article on me. It said untouchable, not going anywhere. And that was in the paper. And then you look and you say, all right, we've gone back-to-back World Series. Why would you want to tinker with this club? However, they already had started because they got rid of Perez before that. And Perez was, to me, he was the absolute glue to that team because he was the one guy that could get on bench, Rose and Morgan, and they all respected him so much that they didn't really give him a whole lot of grief. So he was, to me, the biggest change in that ball club.
And Stevie, for you?
Well, we back then, and we playing in Indianapolis, we didn't have no internet and all that stuff. And I didn't even know I was getting traded. I was playing in the game. They called me off the field during the game. Like I said, that was the worst thing for my mind. Matter of fact, when the guy told me I was going, I thought I was going to night. What's the name of their AAA team? Anyway, I thought I was going to AAA. And the guy said, I see you in New York. I said, nah, man, you got the wrong person. But I did go to New York.
So walk me through that day, Doug and Steve. First with you, Doug, what you remember, who came to you, what your first reaction was, what the reaction of your teammates were. And, that Reds team, like you said, there was a lot of turnover at that particular time.
Well, I heard during the game, we were playing the game, and I saw Pete being you've heard this story, Mark, 100 times. Pete was being very animated talking to the third base dugout. And when the inning was over, he came straight to the dugout, sat down beside me, patted me on my leg, and didn't say anything. And I said, I'm gone, aren't I? And he went, yeah. And I said, where am I going? He said, you're going to New York. And I said, who for? And he said, and I said, which one? He said, the Mets. And I said, who for? And he said, Tom Seaver. And I kind of jokingly said, straight up. And Pete says, no, not hardly. So Pete said, it's you and some other guys. And he didn't really know at the time because it already been announced on the radio. So the game's over and I go in. And gosh, they were so happy of getting Tom Seaver that the front office and everybody, they were knocking us just, you guys pack and get the heck out of here because we got the big boy coming in. And so I took a couple of days and just went to relax and tried to get it in my mind and then headed on up to New York. And when I found out who all was involved in it, of course, I knew Stevie was going to be good. Zach and I have known each other for a long time. I didn't really know Danny as much other than Danny and Stevie were pretty much inseparable in the minor leagues. So,
yeah, you're right.
And they're two great guys. So, but I tell you what, Steve Henderson carried us. When we got up there, I mean, he got off to a good start and was playing good. and he took a lot of heat off the rest of us.
So Steve, I have to imagine it's different for you. You're not at the major leagues. This opens up a path immediately to the major leagues. What's your first reaction to the trade? Going from a team that, if they kept you, I mean that's another question down the road. If they kept the four of you as well as some of the other guys they traded off in that trading deadline, it'd be interesting. But what's your initial reaction to the trade?
Well, first of all, I was just happy to get to the big league, and that was, like I said, we were taught that from day one. You all we trying to do is get you to the big leagues, and you take care of it. And yes, I would love to play with Cincinnati. I would have loved to play with them, but I got an opportunity to come to a team to play, and the people there treated me so well. So it did not bother me one bit. My main goal, get to the big league.
See, Doug, I wish Zachry or Ron could get through the technology on the call. Let me ask you a question about this. So a day or two after everybody reports to New York, there's a story that broke out of Cincinnati that he may have had some arm problems or had issues with a hernia operation. Do you know anything at the time? Were there problems with his health, or was that just a story that broke that had no basis in fact to it?
With who? With
Zachry.
With Zach.
No, this is the first time hearing of that.
Me too. I never heard it.
Yeah.
That's fine. I found it when I was doing the research this morning. It was in the Daily News back in 1977 that apparently had a hernia operation in the off season, and it may have affected his delivery or whatever. I don't know if that was just one of these smokescreen stories they put out, or was there something to it? So you tell me you didn't know anything about it. It's one of those stories that.
Well, if it was in those papers, it had to be factual and truthful. I mean,
especially up there.
There was a lot of articles. We took a lot of heat for some of that, and I think what is so good about it is that all of us knew we were getting traded for the franchise. And the fans, we tried to tell them we were as surprised as you all that we were getting traded. But to this, like Stevie said, they treated us so good. And to this day, I mean, I still do the fantasy camp. I did a Zoom call last night with 9 guys from the Mets fantasy camp. And so, yeah, when we got over, it was a little rocky to begin with. But Stevie, when we did our 25-year reunion of the trade, I'll never forget, Tom couldn't have been any more gracious. But Tom gave all of us an opportunity to be everyday players in the big leagues. And for that, we'll always be thankful.
So it's also interesting because you leave a team that was 29 and 27 at the time, and they're in a pennant race as they were every year. The Mets 4 years prior had been to a World Series, but in 74, they're 20 games under 500. They had a brief uptick in 75. When you guys show up, they're 27 and 35. What's your initial thought walking into a clubhouse that clearly was different than that Reds, clubhouse for sure, and clearly in tremendous flux as the addition of the 4 of you guys, as well as Bobby Valentine and Joel Youngblood as well. So what was it, your first initial reaction to the Mets clubhouse, Stevie?
Well, first of all, I thought it was huge. So I thought it was big compared to other ones. But I just thought that it was some good ball players in there. And we was just, we brought a coach over from Cincinnati about winning. And all the time, I just wanted to win. I know Doug wanted to win. And that's what was taught there. And we was trying to bring that to the Mets, regardless if we was young or not. We wanted to win as many balls as we could.
What about you, Dougie?
Well, I'm thinking, man, I get rid of those old ankle chokers we had to wear, and I can jack up my stirrups now in my pants.
Like that?
How about and let your hair grow out a little bit longer.
Yeah, I got that right. You're right.
You and me both.
So it was, it's like Stevie said, we just wanted to play. We loved to play the game. We wanted to play the game. And at that point in time, even though we both brought up in the Reds organization, the Mets were giving us an opportunity to be everyday ball players. And that's once you make it, you love to be a part of winning ball clubs and championships. But if you love the game, you don't want to be sitting over on the bench watching. You want to be out there. Even if you're losing, you still want to be out there playing.
Right.
So one of the interesting sidelights of the trade, and you all come to the Mets, is that prompted Joe Torre, who was a player manager, to retire. So what was it like? That was Joe Torre's first managing job. We know what he went on to years later. What was it like playing for Torre? And would anybody talking the difference between now that he was a full-time manager and not a player anymore?
What do you think, Stevie?
Well, Joe never changed. Even after the years he went to the Yankees and won, he was still the same guy.
Yeah.
He gave us respect. He, let us go out there and play, and he took care of me as him. I got to say him and Mr. Jerry Kuzma, which nobody know that much, but them two guys, they helped me out a lot, especially Jerry Kuzma.
I agree. If you can't play for Joe Torre, you can't play. It's that simple.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Very cool. So, all right. So, another added footnote of you guys coming to the Mets, and you mentioned Jerry Kuzma, and it's one of my favorite lines ever. Jerry Kuzma was a starting pitcher the night of the blackout. Through 5 innings or 6 innings, he had 11 strikeouts in that game. And when Lenny Randall's at bat, the lights go out, and that game would be continued sometime in September, I believe. And Kuzman said, he knew that if he struck out the remaining batters, he'd have the record, but the 3-month layoff really threw him off his game. But you guys were both in the starting lineup that particular night when the lights went out. Walk me through, Steve, you're in the dugout, and Dougie, you're in the dugout. Lenny's at bat. Steve, what's your first initial thoughts when, Shea Stadium goes to complete darkness?
A guy from Houston, Texas, like that, you don't want to be around too long. So, so them lights went out, and I met her sitting there with Lenny Randall. And I said he was on the field, but I found my way to the dugout in the clubhouse the best way I could. So that's what I did.
Dougie, what about you?
Was that the night we did the Phantom Infield?
Yes, we did.
I remember we were out there doing that Phantom Infield, and guys were diving for balls, and we were going behind our back. And somebody in the newspaper said that was probably the best performance they'll ever see out of this bunch.
That being said, all right, you guys played for the Mets, and record-wise, it wasn't pretty. But you look at the players of that era, and I can tell you that if I mention any of these names, a Met fan will smile when I mention, you and Stevie, and then you go on and you say Willie Montañez, you say Neil Allen, Elliot Maddox, Lenny Randall, Lee Mazzilli. You guys were a lot of fun to watch. I know Major League Baseball players don't like to lose, but you guys seemed to enjoy each other and playing as a team. Was it fun? Was it a good experience, even though you lost so many games? Dougie, you go first on that one, and then let Stevie follow.
People ask me, said, what was your best years in the big leagues? And I say, in New York for 4.5 years, I was a real big leaguer. I went to the ballpark. I knew I was going to be playing. I loved my teammates. We had some great people around us. I knew that there were guys that were going to come and play hard every day. Yeah, we were a little short with some of our talent. And I know in those days, I can remember Joe would tell us sometimes in the offseason, we got a chance to get a couple of players that are going to help us. And the Mets weren't going to help Joe win. So what we had is what they were going to stay with. But we were all pretty young. We were between 22, 27 years of age. So you had a bunch of us that were playing, like Maz and Stevie and me. And it was just Joel. It was just, and I think one of the things that made it good is that over time, if you play hard in New York and you keep your mouth shut, the fans might not like to lose them, but they'll respect you. And I think that's what they saw in us. We weren't that good all the time, but we never alibied. If we stunk, we stunk. And we would own up to it. And I think that's why my experience there was so special.
Stevie, what about for you?
Well, I have to agree with Doug on all that, what he said, man, because it's just, the fan was outstanding. We didn't have the talent like we wanted, but we had the heart. And we played our butts off, and nobody could come to the ballpark and say that we was just going by half butt or something like that, because we gave it all. And for them guys that I had, man, they was the best, man. They was good teammates. Some of them was short, some of them, like you say, but there's a lot of good guys that played hard. And anybody that thought that we didn't play hard, well, you need to look at some of this baseball now.
But it goes back to what you said about Joe Torre. So you said Joe Torre is still the same as he was then. You take a look at those Yankee teams, and I wouldn't say they were devoid of personality, but they were much more corporate. Your Met team with those names I mentioned, no one would ever say that Lenny Randle was a corporate, button down, quiet type of guy. And then, Maz and Willie Martinez and Doug and you guys had bigger than life personalities on a team that wasn't a winning team. But that's why I think everyone loved you guys, even through all that losing. Did Joe foster that type of environment to let you guys be who you were then?
Well, I think we all were pretty much cut, even though we came from a lot of different backgrounds, we were still cut out of pretty much the same cloth in that we had an appreciation for, what we were doing. And when you look in those days, we're making pretty much the same kind of money that the average person was. I mean, we weren't making a lot of money when we came to New York. We were still, if you were a school teacher, we're probably making the same kind of money you are. So it was never about that. Right. And I think that we loved each other. We liked playing the game. And pretty soon the fans caught on, even though there's only 4,000 or 5,000 at the ballpark.
Yeah, but they pulled for us though, boy. They pulled for hard.
Yeah, they did.
Steve or Doug, obviously when you came to New York right after the trade, the fans were not happy. They didn't want to see Seaver go. But you won them over eventually. Was there a turning point, you think, where after you finally said, the fans are now on our side instead of more people left?
Well, you know what? I never thought about that when we come. I know they didn't want him to leave, and I go back to this fella again, Jerry Kuzma. He sit me down and talked to me. That was, Steve was a good friend, and told me not to worry about all the stuff that's going on. We're going to back you and all that. And, I'll never forget the talk I had with Jerry Kuzma. And after I had that talk with Jerry, I wanted the fans to like us, but I feel like Doug said, if we go out there and play hard, somebody going to like us. They're going to like the way we play. Even if they didn't like me, they're going to like the way I play.
And you're right, Stevie. Thanks to Kuzi and Grody and Buddy Harrelson and Felix. I mean,
all of them.
All of them treated us because they knew we didn't initiate the trade. Every one of them were very good to us.
But also that begs, and granted, media was nowhere near what it is today. There wasn't ESPN. There weren't so many outlets. But you guys were pretty clear that, you guys came. It wasn't your choice to be traded for Tom Seaver. And you were very honest and open about it immediately. And I think that kind of paved the way. I think people reading at that point, it was probably Jack Lang or maybe Marty Noble who would get that out. And I think that was, that message was loud and clear, whether it even be on KINER'S Corner. I'm sure Ralph would have asked you, something about the trade, because it was the trade. It was simply, if people say that, other than maybe Wayne Gretzky, people know that it's about Tom Seaver. But internally, even though you guys said that publicly and that was the mantra when anyone asked, did it add extra pressure to you guys to try and overachieve and put up bigger numbers than maybe you were even capable of? And did the pressure of being traded for Tom Seaver weigh on either one of you? Steve, you go first on that one.
No, I didn't really at all. I didn't feel no pressure until after the season. And I found out what I had done because I wasn't thinking about anything but what I was taught. See the ball, hit it, and enjoy myself. Enjoy playing. And that's what I did. A lot of times we played the ball, but I didn't know who was at the ball, to be honest. Because as a major league ball player, once you get locked in, you locked in.
Dougie, what about you?
Well, I think that would have been a little irresponsible to think that if you're coming over in a trade for Tom Seaver, you're supposed to live up to the things that he did. And, we both follow the game. So you have an idea of who the stars are in the game and who the really good players are. You don't replace Tom Seaver. I mean, that's you just go in and you say, all right, we're the ones that were kind of thrown to the wolves. So let's just suck it up and go out. If you look, Zach pitched very well until he broke his ankle that one year. but he was off to a great start. Stevie had a really good career. And so we kind of filled in a little bit, but to replace somebody like Tom, that was never, I don't think, on any of our minds that we got to replace him.
Was the pressure, you were an infielder and Steve, you were an outfielder. How much greater was the pressure on Zachry as the pitcher who replaced Tom Seaver in the rotation? And how did
probably more, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would think so. Yeah. I would think it'd be more. Yeah. And real quick, I always see, whenever I see Mr. Seaver, I tell him, I say, thank you, Mr. Seaver. And I tell him that. That's what I because of the fact he could have said he didn't want to trade or something like that. So, but he gave me an opportunity and gave Dougie an opportunity to start every day in the big leagues, and I was very appreciative of that.
So, we talked about the players, the reception, the manager. Really what prompted this whole trade was a dispute between Tom Seaver and ownership and management. What was it like? What relationships did both of you have? Let's start with Doug and go to Steve. With beyond Joe Torre as the manager, with M. Donald Grant, with the ownership, how much were you aware of their presence in the running of the team?
None.
Well, I think the general manager was Joe McDonald, Mr. Joe McDonald.
Yeah.
And, every once in a while, I would see him scouting. I was coaching at the time, and we had conversations about all the time. And he treated me real well. And that's the only person I really talked to that much. And Joe, I didn't have a problem with Joe.
Neither did I. And he was the only, you're right, Stevie. We never did see the other guys. But Joe McDonald was there, and he was a nice man to us.
So human nature as it is, all right? The Reds with Tom Seaver would not make it back to the World Series. They lost the only postseason series they were involved with when he played the 6 years. So the question is, would the Reds have been better if they kept the four of you, as well as Gary Nolan and Raleigh Eastwick, who went in other deadline deals? Do you think? I mean,
you can answer that, Doug. I'm not.
Wait, Steve. So the question is twofold, because I'm wondering what Steve Henderson would have been like in a lineup with that much protection in the Reds lineup, and I'm wondering, Doug, as you matured as a ball player in that lineup, what the Reds might have looked like if they hadn't made those moves. So Steve wanted to defer to you first, Doug. So go ahead.
You sure don't want to ask Dougie first?
Yeah, we'll let Dougie go first.
All right, I'll go first. All right. Steve Henderson will help any ball club that he plays with. If you put him in there, and he hit 280 anyway, he's going to hit 300 if you put him with that team. If you put me in there, that means you got to take out two-time MVP Joe Morgan, or you're going to take out five-time Gold Glove winner Dave Concepcion, who may go into the Hall of Fame eventually. So I'm not gonna help that ball club. Matter of fact, put me in that lineup. Although the 2 years that I got a chance to play with them, you do up your game when you're playing with a team that's that good. Your game it's magnified, it's contagious, it's positive. Everything that's going on, it just amps you to go to the ballpark because you're probably going to win. And so I think for anybody that's put in that lineup, their game is going to be a lot better.
Stevie?
Oh, well. Dougie, first of all, I think that Gold Glove would have helped anybody, so I don't want to hear that. That had helped a lot of pitchers that we had. But no, I just think I'm not saying I would be a George Foster or nobody else, but I tell you what you would have got. You'd have got a ball player that was going to play hard. And sometimes hard is contagious. So hopefully I can get a turns on them or something.
You can play, my friend. You can play. That's what was fun. And you're right. When you watch the game today and you see guys not running out balls or not playing 100%, you're thinking, man, and the talent that's out there today, big, strong, talented guys.
Right.
It just so I think when you talk to any of us old guys, we would never say we're mad they're making the money, but just respect the game. That's all.
That's all.
Go between the lines, respect the game.
Exactly right.
So
Steve, you've been around the game recently as a hitting coach. Back then,
I'm
the
a
Mets really
retired
didn't
hitting coach.
but fairly
Just retired
recent.
this year.
I mean, right. So, you see the game now and we hear all this about launch angles and such. I think back in the day, I don't know if Phil Cavaretta was around when you guys were, but I know that Ralph Kiner used to go down by the batting cage and offer some tips now and then. What has been the difference in the game, the evolution of hitting since you guys have been out of the game? Steve, you take it first, and Dougie, I know you do a lot of Reds games, so you see it as well. But what's the major difference, Steve, if there's any?
Well, there's so much analytics in the game right now, and I understand some of it, but at the same time, the way they talking about these launch angles and stuff like that, I'm not agreeing with it, but I watch Hank here, and I watch Mark, and I watch all these guys hit, and a lot of that stuff they doing is, it's good to sell books, pretty good to sell books, but once you get in that batter's box, it's very tough to catch up with a 95, 97 mile an hour right around your chest, and you try and teach everybody to hit every ball out of the ballpark. That's but this the new generation, but we combined a little bit what I was coaching. It paid out, but if I had to do it, I don't think Steve Henderson would do it as a hitter.
Yeah. Well, it's
Dougie?
amazing. You look at the difference in the players today, too. Go down a lineup and how many 165-pounders you got in the lineup.
That's right.
And you look back in our era, you look at, we'll just take Buddy Harrelson. He weighed about 150. Felix was big. He was about 180 maybe. But today, all these kids are big, strong, and they've got them. It's a whole new approach to the game. I'm old school. I like seeing a guy get on base, move him over, and get a run. Not that important anymore. Not that important if you strike out. It's not a big deal. So
yeah, that's a big deal to me, boy.
Yeah. So it's just a whole different ball game right now. When people say, would you like to be playing now? The only reason to be playing now is I'm living in a whole lot bigger house. But other than that, I think we played in an era that was really pretty special back in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So looking back at your careers, it's interesting to note all of you guys that were in the trade played most of your major league games as a New York Met. Everything you've accomplished in the game, what do you feel the overall impact of being traded for Tom Seaver was when all's said and done? Dougie?
Well, you're still talking about it 43 years later. There's a lot of trades that people forgot about. They haven't forgot about this one. Mark, I think there was a lot written about this, but as I got older, and I probably didn't handle a lot of the conversation with some of the media folks, because you leave Cincinnati, you have 3 or 4 people in your locker room from the media. You come to New York and you got 40 or 50. And you got guys asking you different questions. Some people were good friends with Tom Seaver, so naturally they're not going to ask you a question in the best tone of voice. And I didn't answer them in the best tone. But after all these years, I've realized that God gave me an ability to play a game that only a few people could play at a high level. And I'm not going to let anybody who didn't play it or doesn't know a lot about it steal the joy that I have and still have from being able to do something that I love. I'm glad I still get to go to the fantasy camps. Matter of fact, Stevie, somebody's already come on this show and said you need to come down to Mets fantasy camp next year.
I need to think about that one.
Oh, you'd love it. You'd love it. Mark comes down, you'd absolutely love it. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The guy who said it was Michael Tuller, the Gary Carter Award winner, right?
Oh, don't pump him up, Jimmy. But Mark, we're still talking about it all these years later, but we talk about it with such reverence and respect. I think more so than we probably did at the very beginning.
So Mark asked about your career as a Met. Both of you ended up ending your careers and played afterward. How hard was it the next time you got traded to leave the Mets? and what was it like then, having been traded once to get them to the Mets?
That was pretty tough on me because we had got close like a family there, and it's ironic it is the guy I got traded for, Dave Kingman. So, that was
deadline deals in '77.
Yeah, I was making headlines one way or the other. So, but it was tough because Zach and them and the guys that came over and the good friends that I had made, that kind of bothered me more than anything to get traded. Because after that, I didn't feel like I played with other guys, but it didn't feel like a family.
Same here. I was ticked. I was really ticked. I just signed a 5-year contract, and Mr. Cashin had come in, and he got rid of me and Maz and Joe. Say good night. I was there. I loved because I would hang around New York. I'm a country boy, obviously, but I would hang around New York for 2 or 3 weeks after the season and do speaking appearances and
singing engagements.
Occasionally. So yeah, I was really ticked, and then a few years later, but Brian Giles really came in for me and took my place, and then Wally Backman right after that, and one of the things that keeps stirring up when we go down to fantasy camp, that this same conversation comes up every single year.
Yeah.
So, a couple of people in the chat room about fantasy camp, but this is a great question for you, Steve. Steve, was your biggest thrill as a Met the game-winning home run against the Giants in 1980?
Yep, that was the question. That was one of my biggest. That was one of my biggest, and I wound up getting engaged the day before that happened. I mean, that same day. The young lady I'm still with her by the name of Pamela Henderson. She's still here with me. I don't know how long. I'll tell you, Dougie, she hanging with me. But anyway.
How many years? Well, I met my wife.
40 in November. Be 40
in November.
Yeah.
Wow. I just had 38 with a lady that I met up there.
But,
so if I'm
that was one of the big home runs, and I hadn't hit a home run yet. I hadn't hit a home run, and I probably wouldn't have if he wouldn't have threw the ball, almost hit me in the head. That kind of woke me up.
Hey, if I'm not mistaken, I'm not sure if that's the game, but I'm pretty sure you told me that story for the KINER'S Corner book about you went on KINER'S Corner and you were wearing, was it a Rheingold or a Schaefer beer shirt?
Oh, that was Schaefer.
Yeah, tell that story, Steve. It's a great story.
Oh, well. Well, I had found the Schaefer shirt, because after the game they would give a little Schaefer beer, and I had the Schaefer shirt on. And every time I would wear it under my shirt, I would have a good game, and I wound up wearing it on KINER'S Corner. And the Schaefer beer company saw it, and oh man, the next thing I know, they asked if I wanted any beer, and I don't know how many cases by my locker, and I wound up sending it to my dad, so he enjoyed that. Boy, it was kind of funny. So I started, every time I had a decent T-shirt on, I try to wear it on there, see if I can get something free. So.
Yeah, back in those days, man, you had to work hard to get a pair of shoes or anything. Because now you go into the locker room now, it looks like a dead-gum sporting goods.
Oh, you're right. You're right.
Yeah, I would take it. We probably get treated better at fantasy camp with the equipment we get than you guys probably did at the major league level back then.
Well, I'll say one thing: you eat a lot better than we ate. That's for sure.
So this is an interesting question from the Gary Carter Award winner. Either Doug or Steve, when did you know you had the talent to be a major leaguer? Was it a coach or did you just know? Steve, you want to take that first?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
For as a major league, like I say, that's a good question. I probably, when I went to spring training in 77 and was around them guys and I did some things in spring training that, other guys wasn't doing it, and I just feel like maybe I could play with these guys. And I just kept working harder to make sure I could play with them.
Dougie?
Stevie, where had we been that night or that trip where we all sat, me and you and Danny sat in the back of the trip in spring? It was 77, I think, in spring training. Little did we know that we was all going to be in a trade a little bit later on.
Oh, I tell you, I think it was because it was a night game. It might have been a day when Pedro Barbone and Griffin and was sitting back there, and I made a mistake by going back there. And I was just talking to you, and boy, I didn't know I was supposed to be back there. I'm not sure, and I didn't know. And they just, and I tried to get up, they wouldn't let me get up. They just buried me, man. I said, oh Lord. And we didn't know we were gonna be traded, Dougie.
I know. Yeah, but to that question, I was a late bloomer. My dad had played a year with Brooklyn, and he knew a lot of scouts. And so when people say, "Well, you had a lot of in," I went, "Well, I don't know. I never had anybody tell me that they thought I could play. I didn't get any scholarships out of high school. How I ended up Kentucky was kind of a fluke, but I just kept playing ball in the tryout camp. So I don't know. There's days you go out there after you've been in the big league for 4 or 5 years, and you still don't know if you belong in the big leagues.
Yeah, and that's true about that.
So another interesting question in the chat room. This from Rich Roman. Steve, both Steve and Doug, who was the toughest pitcher you faced in the major leagues? Dougie, you take that one first.
Well, we had to bring this guy up. It probably Phil, the knuckleballer with Atlanta Negro.
Phil Negro, really?
This guy killed me. I mean, I didn't care about nobody else, but I hit his brother pretty good. But God, that old man, I told him to. I'm sorry. I'm so glad I ain't got to face you no more. I mean, this one guy, I didn't, there was some tough guys I faced, but I wasn't. This guy just, whew,
Steve,
I don't even
the
want
first
to talk
time
about
I faced him, I was still with Cincinnati, and I'd never seen a knuckleball in my life. So I faced him, and I strike out on 3 pitches, and I come back and sit down, and Pete comes over to me. He said, "Hey, Doug, do the league a favor. Look for a walk."
So Steve, here's your stats against Phil Negro. 53 plate appearances, 43 at-bats, 6 hits, a double, no triples, no home runs, 4 RBIs, for
he owned me.
140.
He owned me.
Wow, you lit up Candelaria. 306, 342 against Blyleven, 343 against Tommy John. Some nice numbers there. Wow.
Dang.
Woo.
Dang.
So, Jay, you said J.R. Richard for you, Dougie?
What's that?
You said J.R. Richard for you, Dougie?
Oh,
When you're as bad a hitter as I was, everybody looked like they were so good. I'd have trouble at fantasy camp hitting. So it's a different kind of game right now, because when you hit 8th, and back in our day, you don't hit 2-0, you don't hit 3-1. So you're never in a really good hitters count. And I used to ask Joe, he would tell me, he'd say, "Doug, you got to earn the right to be able to hit in those positions." But it's a big different game right now.
Yes, it is.
So I know one of the Fantasy Camp Hall of Famers, he's working today, but he told me he's definitely going to watch the replay. So I'm going to ask him a question in his honor, because I know that at his Hall of Fame induction, he got up there and said that, believe it or not, growing up, I wanted to be Doug Flynn. And that was Izzy Kushner. If you see Izzy Kushner, it couldn't be
my best friend.
two different body types. But the reason why Izzy Kushner wanted to grow up to be Doug Flynn is it was the first Major League Baseball game he ever went to. Doug Flynn hit an inside the park home run. So why don't you tell us about that inside the park home run, Doug?
It was against the Reds. Yeah, that's the game that I realized that, all right, I am no longer a Cincinnati Red, because I think they had scored 5 in the top of that inning. We came back and scored 10 in the bottom of the inning. I got 2 at-bats in the same inning. I had a good week in that one inning. I had 2 hits. So it was, and then the way the fans kind of greeted you after that, I realized after that game, all right, I am officially a New York Met. And, that was a lot of fun. I don't know if Stevie remembered, but they jumped on us pretty good with 5 in the top. I believe it was the 4th inning, maybe 5th inning.
Came back and got them.
And then we came back and got them, and that was fun, because you knew, and Stevie and I both knew, when we played against the Reds, they wanted us to do well. They just didn't want us to beat them.
That's exactly right.
All right. So in closing, the biggest takeaway from being a New York Met and your greatest memory of being a Met, Stevie?
Biggest takeaway. Probably I didn't spend enough time there. But being with the Mets, I was, the fans was very good to me. I appreciate all the fans in New York, and I in my heart, even though I was drafted by Cincinnati, I'll always be a Met. So that's just something that nobody can take that from me. And again, I tell Mr. Seaver, thank you for giving me that opportunity to be a Met.
Dougie, for you?
I'm like Stevie when around here in Lexington, being that close to Cincinnati, people know because, it's part of the Big Red Machine. But from a personal standpoint, being able to play every day in New York, which I tell people, if you're a professional athlete, that's the only place in the world to play is in the Big Apple. As Tito Fuentes once said, you go 0 for 4, you get your name in the paper across the country. If you go 4 for 4, you get your name in the paper across the country. So it's just the going to the fantasy camp, and I think that's why I do so many, because the folks there treat you so genuine. And I've just Stevie and I are blessed. And who knows if we'd have had a good relationship if we'd have both just stayed around Cincy or gone to other teams. So I feel honored that we were a part of something special. We still remain dear friends. And Mark, appreciate you having us on here. You and AJ having us on to talk.
Yes, Mark, I appreciate it too.
43 years. Golly, 43 years, Stevie.
Yes, sir.
I always
Mark
love
and
talking
AJ.
to you guys.
Thank you, guys.
It's a pleasure. And again, you mentioned fantasy camp, Doug. And in closing, a lot of the fantasy camp guys are there, saying what great person you are and things like that. And Steve, I've had the opportunity to speak to you numerous times. The last time, when you were the Phillies batting coach, last time you were in there. I think that's the reason that people don't, you say it's the reason why people still talk to you guys. I think it's more than that. I think the roots that you've put down in the Mets community, Doug, in all these years at Met Fantasy Camp go well beyond the trade, and just the way you deal with people on a one-on-one basis and your honesty, and Steve, just the way you handled yourself here as a young player breaking in with that pressure of coming for, you were that minor league prospect, the 5-tool can't miss guy. And, you handled yourself so well here. And granted, it wasn't a great time win-wise, but I don't think you'd find anyone my age that wouldn't smile when you mentioned that entire roster. It was just
Mark,
fun.
Mark, if we get Steve to fantasy camp, we'll tell you a little story about one night where we went out and Steve and Danny kept me from getting shot.
Yeah.
That's a teaser for next time.
So Doug, and that's going to be a $5,000 story.
Exactly.
It's probably going to be well worth it, though. All right, guys. Thanks so much. We really appreciate you taking your time out.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, AJ.
Man.
Great.
Thank you, guys. All right, Dougie. See you later, buddy.
Love you,
Bye-bye,
Stevie.
guys.
See you,
Love
pal.
you too, man. You take care.
All right, brother.
Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.